Now, there's a lot of different plant-based options out there, from the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger. There's a lot of different brands that are making a plant-based ground meat. But you can make this at home. I've showed you a lot of different ways, but today I want to make an easy way. I want to show you some ways that you can make one of these plant-based ground meats using just a bag of textured vegetable protein and a few other ingredients. Now, the cool thing is this 1 2-pound bag of textured vegetable protein will actually make about 10 pounds of ground beef. That is a lot of burgers. But with this plant-based version, you're gonna be able to make meatballs, meatloaf, tacos, pastas. So let's get moving. After this, you'll never need to buy a plant-based ground ever again. So the first thing that we're gonna make is we're going to make our fat. Now, with any ground meat, it's usually a marbled fat. We're gonna use about 100 grams of water. And I'm just gonna put the top on my blender with my mixing cap kind of removed here. And we're gonna get the blender started. And this is on a really low speed, and we're just gonna use 1 teaspoon of the methyl cellulose. And now we have 300 grams of a melted coconut oil. Again, we're just gonna keep this blender going on a low speed and slowly pour in. Okay, now that should emulsify into almost like a mayo-like texture. And you'll see this worked perfectly. We have that really fat-like texture. Now, 2 things. I'm using a really refined coconut oil because we don't want our burgers or our meat to taste like coconut. So refined coconut oil will remove most of that coconutty flavor. But this is also enough fat for about 4 pounds of meat. This technique was actually developed by Modernist Pantry. I did a review of one of their kit burgers, and I just loved the way that this technique came out. So this is what I'm gonna be doing going forward for my plant-based meats. So we're just going to be dividing this into 400 grams. That's all you're gonna need per 1 pound. So at this point, I'm just gonna cover these guys up and throw them in the freezer. We just want them to firm up into solid discs. But now let's mix up our dry and wet ingredients to make the rest of our plant-based meats. So today we're gonna be making 2 pounds of plant-based meat. So I'm gonna use 200 grams or 2 cups of textured vegetable protein. Now for the rest of the dry ingredients, we're gonna use some beetroot powder. I found this one at Whole Foods. You can find them at a few different grocery stores, usually in the health food section. We're just gonna do 2 teaspoons of beetroot powder. This is for color primarily, but it does add a bit of a flavor to it. It does add a little bit of a characteristic. We're doing some more methyl cellulose. I'm gonna be doing about 2 tablespoons of methyl cellulose. Now we're gonna add an additional 30 grams of protein. Now essentially you could use any powdered protein you like. This was easily found at Whole Foods, again in the health food section. Pea protein's pretty easy to find now. I'm gonna use 3 teaspoons of the mushroom powder or mushroom extract. If you use the Trader Joe's, do a little bit extra because it's not as potent. Now for this recipe, you can either use a nutritional yeast or a yeast extract. Both of them are gonna get the extra glutamates that you're gonna want to make this plant-based meat. I usually use the Marmite for this, but it's gonna need quite a bit to make the 2 pounds of meat that we're making, so I don't wanna go through as much. So we're just gonna use 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. And we're just gonna do a little bit of thyme, about 1 gram. Same thing, about 1 gram of garlic powder and 1 gram of onion powder. All we have to do is just kind of give this a little mix, make sure all of the dry ingredients are really well mixed together. So now we're gonna go to the wet ingredients. We have 2 cups of cold water. We're gonna add 2 tablespoons of white distilled vinegar. I'm gonna add about 1.5 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. Now, if you can't find dark soy sauce, do 2 tablespoons of regular soy sauce. Just give this guy a quick mix. And then all we're gonna do is just add this mixture into our dry mixture. So I'm gonna switch back over to a spatula here just to make sure that all of the dry ingredients are really well combined. We wanna make sure we get all of those dry ingredients in there. Now at first this is gonna seem more like a loose meat consistency or like a sloppy Joe consistency than this is gonna seem anything like a plant-based ground meat that can be formed or anything like that. So what we're gonna do is this TVP needs to rehydrate. The longer it sits, the better. We're gonna allow this mixture to sit for about the next half an hour. Okay, this is sat for about the last half an hour. The TVP is nice and hydrated. This is sticking together very firm, just like you would expect a ground meat to stick together. At this point, our coconut oil fat pucks have frozen fairly solid. Now, I'm not gonna touch these directly because the heat from my hands will melt them pretty fast. So what I'm gonna do is just move them over to a piece of parchment paper, give a little bit of room, and I'm gonna use a box grater and just grate that fat down into the meat. I'm gonna use the large end of a box grater, the large size, because I wanna get some nice chunks, nice size pieces of fat in there. Now, any extra large pieces that you might have, just give them a quick chunk up. Now, at this point, all we wanna do is just kind of fold these in. You don't wanna mix too heavily because you'll end up breaking down that coconut oil. This coconut oil is gonna melt pretty fast. I'm gonna put this in the freezer for just a few moments while we put a chill on it, while we grate down our other puck of fat before we mix it in. And then we're just gonna mix this in a little bit at a time, not like we did the last time, about half of it first. Now, at this point, you have an incredible plant-based ground that can be used in place of any ground in any recipe. So let me just divide this up into 1 pound each, and then we're gonna move forward. Now, if you use these little plastic containers, these things work great because you can actually divide them up into 8-ounce portions, which will give you 2 burgers each. Now that we got that divided up, let's make some meatballs. So I thought I had some fresh garlic on hand. I don't shoot me. So all I'm gonna be using in this one is some jarred garlic. It's always nice to have this on hand for when you forget to have fresh. So I'm gonna do about a teaspoon of this jarred garlic here, which equals about 2 cloves. We're gonna do about a teaspoon of dried parsley. Now this is Italian dried parsley. Now if you have fresh basil, chop that up, throw it in there. Otherwise I'm just gonna use some Italian seasoning. It's gonna be about a teaspoon, half of a teaspoon, about a teaspoon of nutritional yeast. And I'm gonna do about a 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs. Now these are unflavored breadcrumbs, just a regular 1/4 cup. And then we're just gonna mix these guys up. Now I'm gonna chop about half of a fresh shallot. Now we just have a small skillet on around a medium heat. Let's throw shallots in and just cook those down real quick. Give them a nice simmer, kind of release some of that moisture. These guys are looking good. I'm just gonna add these right into the bowl here. Mix in these shallots into this mixture. And let's start forming some meatballs. So we're just gonna grab a bit of the mixture and we're just gonna do, about golf ball sized meatballs. And then all we're gonna do is just throw these in the pan and let them cook. I probably made this one just a pinch too big, so I'm gonna go a little bit smaller. That one's big. We just wanna brown them all the way around, just kind of constantly turning, making sure that they get completely cooked all the way around on the outside. Gonna move them over to a baking pan. We're just gonna throw them in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes so that way they can firm up, finish cooking the rest of the way through. These meatballs look wonderful. Look at these things. Oh, I'm burning that crap out of my hand. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So at this point we have a simple weekday sauce cooking here in the saucepan. If you need to know how to make that, check out my buddy Steve over at Not Another Cooking Show. He has a killer sauce. Let them cook in the sauce to kind of get flavored up for about only just 10 minutes or so, and then these things are gonna be ready to serve. I'm ready for that Drosera Chardonnay for these meatballs. So just like I said before, you could use this stuff just like how you would use regular ground. That's why I wanna make a meatloaf. So I'm gonna use both of these 8-ounce packages of our plant-based meat that we made. So I have about a half of a cup of chopped onion. I'm gonna throw that in, along with 1 whole prepared vegan egg. This is a Bob's Red Mill egg replacer. We're gonna do 3/4 of a cup of breadcrumbs, about 2 tablespoons of ketchup, some Italian parsley again. I love this stuff. This stuff tastes really good. It's great in a lot of these like meatball recipes and in the meatloaf recipes. It really adds a lot of flavor. Just gonna do about a teaspoon of onion powder, teaspoon of garlic powder, and some fresh cracked black pepper. And then once we got everything combined, I'm just gonna use my hands to form this into a loaf. Now, once we have ourselves a little loaf, we're just gonna put this into our loaf pan. And now, like any good meatloaf, we gotta make our glaze sauce. So I'm gonna do about 2 tablespoons of ketchup, along with about 1 tablespoon of yellow mustard. Sweeten this guy up by doing about a tablespoon of maple syrup. Let's have some fun with it and drop in about a teaspoon of sriracha. Now I'm just gonna mix this guy up and then coat the entire top and sides of our meatloaf. So let's throw this in the oven at 375 degrees for 40 minutes. We're gonna drop it down to 350 degrees, cover, and cook for an additional 20 minutes. Oh, that smell, that's hot. Oh, God, this little silicone thing just kind of stinks. That smells and looks amazing. I haven't had meatloaf in a long time. I can't wait to do some like meatloaf sandwiches with this sucker. Just like the meatballs. I mean, that's a meatloaf.